Okay, everybody, welcome back. I'm Matt Carpenter.
And I'm Peg Keough.
Welcome to college. Welcome to college. Yeah, we're still working on it, guys. Um, all right, great. Well, hopefully, if you're joining us for the first time, welcome. If you're back for more, welcome back. Last time we talked, largely, it just kind of went this way naturally. We didn't necessarily have it scripted, but it just kind of ended up being that I was asking Peggy about her college experience. That's kind of how it just worked out organically, and we thought we'd flip the script this time, and Peggy can put me on the hot seat, as she said the other day here. But before we do that, Peggy, first of all, just curious if you have any observations or anything that's going on in our world. I can kind of start here because I'm seeing this interesting trend. I don't know if that's the right word for it. Troubling is probably a better word for it. And I'll pick on some specific schools here. Vassar, Babson, U Chicago. What was another one? Boston College. And again, it's a little unfair to those guys because they are not the only ones, but they're the ones that I've seen and are top of mind for me. But what's been happening is that we've been seeing some financial aid packages that have been less than we would expect and appealing them, right? Going back to see if we can do better as we always do. But what's been very, very common is that these colleges have made assumptions about what these families had in investments, or more specifically in their checking and savings account, that were completely different from reality. And the basic answer is, well, these are just computer models, things like this. And I'm thinking of one particular example where this family was saying, look, I had $2,000 in my checking and savings account, like on the day we submitted the FAFSA and the CSS profile. And at least this was Vassar in this case. At least they were good enough to say, "Hey, we calculated that you had 84,000. Can you give us the statements or prove it?" And what was really interesting to me, because I became suspicious a little bit of the family where they're getting cute, but I saw their tax returns $0 in interest or anything like that. Quite literally $0, and then their calculator was assuming they had 84,000. So, kind of to be determined here, but that's one anecdote of kind of a general trend that I'm seeing, and just
Well,
trying.
let me just ask about that. So in the prior year, literally there was no Schedule B dividends and interest.
There was some dividends, right,
Yeah.
that had to
Okay.
do with some, and really kind of not a ton in investment, small mutual fund, right, that
Yeah.
aligned with
Yeah.
what they reported. And I
Okay.
know the family a little bit, right? So they're not the type to get really very aggressive and try to game the system.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so it was just like really, very, really interesting that, wow, these colleges are just assuming that this, and so I've put feelers out there, to folks on our team to say, do you know, is there a new technology? Like one, again, these are just working assumptions here. Is there some type of new software or AI where maybe, because this family does live in a Boston suburb that's an affluent community. They have a two household family, and with good, so maybe the model just assumes that
Yeah.
this family must have this amount in savings and investments,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
Which again,
Well, yeah, which this whole conversation makes it so clear, and I'm saying this to our listeners, like you have to understand what you think you're going to be getting from these colleges, because then if it doesn't look in the ballpark, to say, all right, I need to get help. I need to figure this out. I need to talk to the college. But if you don't know, you have no idea. And yeah, it's huge. And with AI coming up, who knows, to your point, Matt, they could be using programs, this zip codes, we're going to assume this, you know, because people fill out the forms incorrectly all the time, and not to usually pull a fast one just because they're stressed and they're confused and they're not numbers people, and they just fill it out incorrectly. So the college might step in, even if they did fill it incorrectly, like you're saying, and say, hey, actually, we think they messed up, but it's really this.
that's right.
So it's so important to understand that, to understand where you fit. at these different schools.
And to that point, that was my assumption where I said to the guy, I said, hey, look, let me see your tax returns because you probably showed a couple grand in interest and the college just backed into a number and just did not take you at face value for what you put on your financial aid applications, which is totally common, right?
Right.
And again, I said, okay, that's not it. So that's why it's got me thinking again. It's one of two things in my mind. There's some type of software, or who knows? Me, it could be the financial aid counselors just making their own assumptions as they can do. These are private businesses, right? But I think it's either something down that path or it's these colleges that you applied early decision and we're just going to squeeze you because we get all the leverage. So,
Yep, yep. But if you have the knowledge, then you can come back and talk to them. So you don't, you, you guys are the buyers. You have the leverage. You're the purchasers. You got to keep that in mind. And you got to, I mean, ED, that's a whole nother conversation. We won't get into that today, but yeah, you lose some leverage. But yeah, interesting. I mean, there's always something in our space, which is what makes it fun for us, right? There's always something. Okay, so now we're not going to avoid the hot seat anymore, buddy. We're going to let's chat here. So last time we talked about my kind of not upbringing, but kind of what was the pulse in the house around college and, how the genius that's sitting before you materialized. I
for now,
kid.
baby,
I
Ivy League.
kid. I kid. I kid. But anyway, so now let's talk about you. So growing up, North Shore, Boston. So what was it? You're the oldest of three. Like, what was kind of the vibe? You're in middle school, high school. What was the whole vibe when college started to just be even on the radar?
Yeah, it's obvious. Since we spoke, I've thought more about my own experience and just kind of analyzing it, right? Obviously, you grow up one way and it's all you know. But what was interesting, I think, similar to you, is that college was always inevitability in my household. There was not even a thought, consideration, or that there might be a different option, even, right? So, and that's just, again, from as long as I can remember, that was any conversations around it was just kind of like where, right? It just, where are you going to college? Work hard, get good grades. That was the expectation, right? Very much so, right? Anything less than basically an A, I was going to hear about it. And specifically as it pertained to college, even when I was little, probably really middle school is when that started. But yeah, and both my parents went to college, so I think it was just a foregone conclusion that I'm going to college. Now, I will say, I think my parents, in some ways, were smart in how they positioned it. My, I remember my dad, because I grew up in a very small town, right? I kind of idolized the football was a big deal in my town, and the high school football players were gods in my town. It's like Tom Brady were the varsity players, right? And I get to, there were some of my friends' older brothers. And so I think he was a little bit concerned that I was too infatuated with my little small town community. And a lot of people worked in the trades. It's a clamming town. We live on the ocean, and that's my father was by no means above that. But what he said to me, I remember I have one memory like burned in my brain. It was middle of summer. It's so freaking hot out, and these guys were the town workers were doing asphalt, right, laying, and it's so hot, and I'm like, oh my god, these poor guys. We're looking at them, and my dad said, and again, he was very careful how he said. He's like, look, you always hear me talk about college. He's like, you got to do good in school. He's like, the reason why I want you to do well in school is so you have options. Like I know how much you love Jeff Vitale and Jay Vitale and all these Brett all these famous football players. He's like, but if you decide to go work for the town eventually and live in Ipswich forever, that's amazing. That's me and your, mom's dream come true. But I want you to decide that, right? And some of those guys probably didn't get to choose. They didn't do great in school, so they didn't have a choice to go to college, so they had less options than to do something in the town. And I thought that was a great way to position it. And so, anyways, that was kind of his talk track that I think it was in a healthy way. He had some unhealthy ways, but that was his way of positioning it and trying to keep me motivated, I think, from a
Yeah,
early
it
age.
It opens up opportunities. So then um how did you kind of think about what colleges might I be interested in? You've already mentioned football, and that's a
Yeah.
big part of your life. You played football. How many years did you play varsity football in high school?
Well, played varsity football for 3 years, but it was like the passion of mine. It was the most important thing for my everything. It got you a lot of clout in again, in my community, as I mentioned. Sometimes I look back, I'm like, did I even like football or did I just want to do what got, you know, status, basically, right? I think there's
Yeah.
definitely a combination there. But I did definitely want to play football in college still and be part of a team or sports. And then I had, grand aspirations, but eventually just came to a reality of, okay, I can't. The dream would have been to play football at Notre Dame, Peggy, and I kept it alive for as long as I could until the rubber meets the road there eventually.
So was that part of the selection though? Was, hey, where are schools that, I'll look at the academics, of course, but where I could play football? Like
A
that
hundred
was part.
percent. Well, you know what? It was one of two things. I said I either want. Okay, look, I'm not. When I came to the, reach a conclusion, probably junior year of high school. Like, all right, I'm not a Division I athlete. Can I? Do I want to go and experience Division I football just as a spectator and whatever? Or do I want to go play and be a part of a team? And that was kind of some of the biggest factors in my thought process. And I gotta be honest with you, because after Notre Dame, that would have been my top choice. I knew there was no chance to get in there. I thought maybe I had a chance at Boston College. I have a feeling if I got in, I probably would have went there and not played, just had that college experience. But I didn't get in. So it kind of ended up being that, okay, do I want to go to some of these, again, other bigger ish schools that are not my top, that are I didn't love the same way I love BC, or do I want to go play at Stonehill, which is obviously where I ended up.
Well, not obvious. Our listeners didn't know that, so we have to
To
share it
my
with
fans, Peggy, to my fans.
them. 4 years football there, and you met some of your lifelong friends. So that's amazing. So since we're talking about the emotional side, but being a nerdy financial person, I'm curious in your household, the whole money talk, thinking about money, how did that, was there stress around that? Was there stress when you were like in the crunch time senior year? And I would like you to tell the story about the small error that maybe you made and you didn't think was a big deal. I think that will be a nice story to share as well.
Happy to share that. But it's funny. And again, I've probably spend more time than most people would reflecting on my own experience, given what we've chosen for
Yeah,
career.
what we do. Yeah.
Um, and I think I was probably fairly typical in that, and I think especially, whatever. But I don't know how much is tied to the Irish Catholic piece, but money's not really talked about, right? And it's just this kind of thing that's there, but there's not this level of comfort, transparency, whatever. So like I knew it was there. I knew it was a stressor, but we never had like an honest, like brass tacks conversation. And I know my dad was, and he was the breadwinner, at least at the time, was very much hyper focused on the financial piece of it. And my mom was like, Matt, go everywhere, basically go wherever you want, we'll figure it out type of deal. That was her attitude. But yeah, I think if we could all go back in time, we would have changed. And again, I've been fortunate to be a fly on the wall for so many families to see all the different ways families approach this and have the conversation. I'm just such a believer in that we're a pretty good example, I think, of how to do it incorrectly, how we did it. And again, I'm not throwing shade at my parents. Like, I was a part of that and they were doing the best they could, but it's not the right way to do it, in my opinion. The right way to do it is just to be frank and here's our resources and here's what this looks like. And let's have a family discussion and get on the same page. And we just never really did that, which I think led to some more stressors. And then again, some financial results that probably weren't as good as they could have been if we were a little bit more, you know, honest with each other up front. right? So
Yeah.
that's
Yeah. Yeah. And honestly, that's probably pretty typical. It's a big thing and it's overwhelming to people. And I think just my background with financial planning, if you can like tuck it away and look at it later, people do that with stuff that's scary. And so this is a big behemoth. And then your parents have two other kids. I mean, it's just a lot. And you want to, your mom's response is typical, right? We want
yeah,
you to be able to go where you want and we'll figure it out. And as you and I say all the time now, I mean, you're in your 40s, we'll figure it out now is a lot different than when your mom said we'll figure it out. It's a big deal. It's a big
famous
deal.
last famous
Yeah,
last words. We'll
yeah,
figure it
yeah,
out. And
yeah.
and again, in their defense too, I don't know that there's any way that they could have positioned it to me that I would have been like that I wouldn't have been like, I'm doing whatever I want. And I'll figure it out. I'll borrow as much. I was just very uh probably immature even by 18-year-old boy standards, right? Which is saying
Yeah.
something.
Yeah,
So,
yeah. Well, so you mentioned BC and Notre Dame, and then you went to Stonehill. I'm sure there were some other schools, but the whole, like, what was the atmosphere junior, senior year when you're like, you're really grappling with it, you're
yeah.
taking SATs or ACTs, all that kind of, was it like stressful? Was it kind of chill? You'll end up where you need to be. What was it like?
Yeah, I would say it was more like a back burner thing for me, and like my mom was the big like driver. Like you got to start thinking about this. I think one thing that my mom that she did that was smart was like I didn't have a big appetite for like going to see colleges. I'd rather do something else on the weekends or whatever, and had very much valued my social life, especially when I wasn't playing sports. But she said, "Hey, we'll take your girlfriend with you, and or we'll take a buddy with you." Right. And we'll get, and like, so she kind of bribed me that way, which again, I think was kind of smart. Because at least it got me like, all right, we'll go down to New York and look at Fordham and whatever, and all right,
Yeah,
and whatever kind of different swings we did there. So that wasn't a bad idea, I think, because I think if my mom was trying to drag me there herself, I said, no thanks. I'll get in where I get in type of deal.
yeah,
So
yeah,
so again, I was very blasé about it, I think. Um and again, my mom kind of took the role of taskmaster, which I'm sure she hated. And I was just kind of tough to corral, right? And I still do.
yeah.
We'll figure it out. We'll when the deadline comes, I'll take care of business type
Yeah,
of.
I know. I know. That's your modus operandi. So
Yeah.
tell us about when you were filling out your financial aid forms.
Right. So, I mean, this is interesting too. I gotta revisit this question to my parents because I think this was typical in that it tends to be, right. You probably see this, Peggy. Like most parents in two household families, if you're fortunate enough to be a two household family, right? The parents divide and conquer. Maybe one parent kind of helps with admissions, one parent helps with financial aid, or maybe one parent kind of just does all the college stuff and the other parent does all the other duties, right, to maintain the household. And I guess we were a household where my mom was just on the front lines for both of those, right? Trying to be taskmaster of both of them. And we laugh now because like my mom, my mom, God love her. She's an airhead. She's pretty aloof. She's not your numbers person, right? Um, so we were like, how was my mom like in charge of the FAFSA and that stuff, because my dad's a little bit more savvy with that. And but she was, right? That was just kind of the deal. And she had done the FAFSA by some miracle all by herself, right? And she said, Matt, I just need to know your social security number, right? And I said, but I rattle it off to her. And, lo and behold, to me, I was off by one digit, right? Which I didn't think was a big deal and honestly thought was pretty good that I came that stinking close, right? Of course, that threw the whole thing into, it was already a very stressful, overwhelming process that threw a gigantic monkey wrench into it, especially where things weren't electronic, Diane. Everything's by
Yeah.
mail, and then you got to go to just a huge clusterfuck. And and again, so it's just kind of she still laughs that unbelievably ironic that I kind of ended up in yeah, in the space that I am today. And again, she still wants to like kill me when she thinks that response of like, Mom, I was just off by one digit. Like, tell him to relax. So
Well, so tell me your thoughts about, because I have strong feelings about this, about like where you went to school. I mean, you talked about Notre Dame being the dream and BC. You went to Stonehill. How much do you think that really made you who you are today versus obviously you wouldn't have played football at Notre Dame, so you would have had a different college experience. But as far as who you are, what you're doing, how you're impacting the world now, you
that's a
know?
great question. Great question, Peggy.
Thank you.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you, my dad did, excuse me, I think another smart thing here when it was kind of crunch time, decision time, I think in and around where I knew where I was accepted, and it's like in those couple of months, right? And you're making this gigantic decision, right? And or at least it certainly feels that way at the time. That was probably the one part of the process where I did kind of feel the gravity of the whole thing, right? Like, wow, where's my life going to take me? And he said, well, do a pros cons list and try to like, what do you want out of your college experience? Basically, is it a job? Is it to be involved? Whatever it is. He goes, go make it your own. And then let's kind of like distill it down together. And my ultimate thing was like my number one criteria for what I wanted out of my college experience was friends for life. However I arrived there, and there was other things on the list. My both my parents are still, and I'm sure that influenced it. Like they were in each other, they're still very close, right? All God parents to each other's kids, and all each other's weddings and all that. And I was like, oh, that's amazing, and I valued my friends from home. Like, wow, imagine even having more. And and so then one great thing about it being a student athlete is that oftentimes you get to do overnight visits. So I always say if anybody has a chance to do an overnight visit and stay on campus with kids, that's when you really see like
Yep.
what is the vibe, when it's not just a fancy tour where everything's perfect and da da da.
All PC. Yeah. Yeah.
Exactly. Like, how did these? And I was fortunate enough to do whatever I did, a handful, half dozen of those. And I said, definitely Stonehill was the one where I'm like, I can just really see myself with these people and these types of people, basically. Right. And that's why I felt kind of the most comfortable. And so that was, I think, the biggest, kind of the biggest factor for what kind of got
Yeah.
me
Yeah.
there. And to your point, tying that back to your question, I think the short answer is yes, 100%. It shaped who I am today, and I do think a ton of that is because of my friends, right? And birds of a feather flock together. And like when I look around at my friends now, all of whom I'm still incredibly close with, everybody's just in I would say a great spot in their life, right? Like all have successful relationships with their partner, incredible parents, financial stability. They're really close with their families, with their friends. So kind of like all the things that I value most. I look around the room and I see that with my friends. And I think it's like a nice balance of, or this has been part of our evolution, especially I think or maybe being an athlete. When we first came from different uh we were all rivals in the beginning, right? I remember
Hmm.
especially seeing him being like, I don't know. I'm better than him. I'm sure he said this thing, right? But I was also intimidated and, whatever. And we all had a version of that until we came together to be a team. And then really, as we've evolved, I think have a really nice balance of trying to like push each other in really healthy ways, but also, be really supportive,
Yeah.
each other
Yeah.
too. So,
Sounds like relationships were massive. There's the academics, but and we're all relationship beings, so we all need relationships. So
yeah,
yeah, yeah,
it's like you're right, and I think for me, I was kind of like I had some level of I don't know if it was a false sense of confidence or whatever of like wherever I go, I'll kind of figure it out. I kind of had that underlying belief that like financially, I'll figure that out. But here's what I want out of it, you know. So that
yeah,
that
yeah.
was probably a little bit unique, but and I
Yeah,
don't know.
it is. Yeah, it is unique because people do focus a lot on the academic and maybe and status, which the status piece, isn't a great thing to focus on, but academics make sense. But we're 17, 18-year-olds going to college. Do we really know exactly what we're going to do for our whole life? I mean, I know I did it, and I was 17 when I went to college. So, just hyper focused on academics, you might be missing the boat too. So, maybe you had that pearl of wisdom even as a youngster on the right way to approach it.
I wanted to party and chase girls is the truly the biggest factors for me. They really were. And it's funny, my mother, God love her, that's how she would motivate me to do good in high school. She'd say, Matt, just do your homework now. When you get into college, you can party and fool around with girls as much as you want. And literally, that's how she sold it to me. And I think that's not the right motivator for everybody, but
Yeah. Yeah. Well, if she knows her kid too, right?
knows her
So,
boy. She knows her
yeah.
boy.
Well, so before we wrap up, so what what do you want to share from, like you said, you've been thinking back on this. Are there any, like, I know people like to say, what would you tell your 18-year-old self? Um, does anything come to mind that you would tell your 18-year-old self, or any regrets in, how decisions you made and how things materialized to now?
Well, so I mean, I guess my personal kind of regret was that I would have been a little, maybe more appreciative back then for how expensive this thing is and how stressful it is. And I would have been a better team player within my family unit. I would have given uh that's kind of my short answer there. If I could go back in time, right? But I think my feedback for my whole family would be, again, just having a more open, honest dialogue and staring at it. Here's what it's going to cost, Matt. Here's what we can contribute as parents. So that means you would be responsible for this. And let us help you understand what this means, right? Like, one thing I am curious about, how obviously we like in our software, how it shows you, like, this is going to be your first monthly payment. I always think there's a chance that might have resonated with me, right? Because I had a job and
Mhm.
all. I know that borrowing 50,000 or 100,000 or 90,000, that wouldn't have resonated with me. But maybe if I saw your first monthly payment is gonna be $2,200 or whatever, I might have paused there, right?
Right. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so that's like the technical takeaway, but in meta terms, it's just like I would have been kind of more grateful and kind of understanding of it for my parents. And then I think for them, if they could have gone back in time, they would have wanted just been a little bit more transparent and just open about the financial piece of this puzzle.
Right, right. And in your defense, I mean, we're kids, right? When we become parents, I'm sure you've had this, where I look back and once I was a parent, I'm like, oh my gosh, I feel so badly that I did this and this and this. Were my parents even sleeping at night? But
Yeah.
when you're a kid, you're like, wow, what, what, what the hell? Why are they so uptight? What does it matter?
That's their problem.
And
Exactly. That's their problem. Let
I
me do
never
my
thought
fucking
about what
problem.
college costs. They just said blah blah blah. They laid it out. I was like, okay, and I wasn't like, oh, I should be so appreciative. It was just like, okay, you want me to go? I'll go. So,
Yeah.
anyways, well, thank you for your sharing. Thank you for your vulnerability. And yeah, so for all you listeners, like, we just want you to get to know us, kind of see our situations. Maybe some of it is landing for you. Maybe you're pulling some of that and saying, yeah, that's what my family did. And, I've got a ninth grader, and I got to sit down with my partner and rethink some stuff we're thinking. Hopefully some of it you can pull something from, or maybe it's validation of certain
Right.
things for you.
Yeah.
Whatever's helpful. And as we said at our first episode, this is so incredibly emotional. And
Mhm.
that's why, we're numbers people, but that's why on the podcast we really want to be touching on the emotional piece constantly, because it's such a big deal in this
100%.
process. So
100%. All right, Peggy.
All right, guys, we will see you next
See you
time.
next time.
All right.